Morning everyone. In this series of videos we're going to look at London by William Blake. In this video we'll explore a few of the key quotes and the language features in the poem. There's a link in the description to the other videos, as well as a link to the slides if you want them. Now I've split the poem up into 4 sections, just so that the annotations are easier to read, and this first section is lines 1 to 4. The poem kicks off with the first person pronoun I, and we get a sense of the character as he or she is walking around London and we hear their opinions on London. It could be Blake writing in an autobiographical style, or it could be that Blake was expressing his own opinions through the nameless first person narrator. Either way, using the first person is a bit more personal. It's almost like he's telling the story directly to us. And Blake chooses the verb wander, which is a word laced with connotations of being purposeless. He doesn't say he walked each charted street, he says wandered. So the fact that he wanders, suggesting no aim, no direction, could be a reflection of how aimless and powerless he really feels living in London. And then we have the repetition of the word chartered. Chartered basically means ownership. It's when someone is given the rights of ownership or use of something. So here, meaning that the streets that we walk down are owned by powerful people. These people, we'll call them the establishment, are so powerful that they even own the rivers. Think about the rivers being a symbol of freedom and movement and life. But some people hold so much power that they control our freedoms and the lives of humans. They even, seemingly, control the nature that surrounds us. So some humans foolishly believe that they are more powerful than nature, which is arguably the most powerful thing on Earth. So, with the ground that they walk on and the river that they drink from being owned by those in power, we get a sense of how oppressed the people of London really are. They seem to have few rights or freedoms. With rivers and water being symbols of life, we get a sense that the people don't have control over their own lives. That's a job for the rich and powerful. In stanza 2, we have the anaphora of in every, and then the repetition of every. And this could represent how these awful conditions and dire situations are everywhere that you look and everywhere that you turn in London. The oppression is completely inescapable for the narrator, as it is for the people who live in London, particularly the lower classes. We also have the juxtaposition of the infant, a symbol of innocence, and the cry of fear. The infant juxtaposition is also repeated in stanza 4 too, with the infant's tear. We have the juxtaposition of something completely innocent with something awful. So even the children, the infants, the newborn babies are already corrupted. They're already infected with this plague of poverty and oppression. Children are supposed to be carefree, blameless and pure. Yet these children were forced into work as things like chimney sweeps, or to work in factories, or in coal mines. And one of the key ways to move higher up the mark scheme in English literature is to provide multiple interpretations of something. This basically means that you can look at one quotation and discuss it in detail, writing about the different things that it could mean. That said, I think that mine forged manacles in line 8 is probably the key quotation of the poem, and one that we can extract a lot of information from. Now, a manacle is a type of handcuff, so based on this, we could get a few different things. It could mean that the Londoners are mentally enslaved by those in power, almost as if their brains, their minds, are in handcuffs. Or this quote could mean that they are enslaved by the status quo, the way that things are. Now, manacles are a symbol of slavery, so this could be a nod to the working conditions of the oppressed working class in London. The mind-forged part could suggest that someone's brain, some powerful mind, has created the oppression that Londoners face, so their minds have thought up ways to shackle the working class. Or could it be that the working class oppress themselves? That these manacles are all in their mind and their imaginations, They have accepted that this is just the way that things are, and are refusing to do anything about it, such as start a revolution. And Blake is trying to tell them that there is actually nothing stopping them from taking the power. It's all forged in their minds. And if we look at the word forged, it just means made. So it could be that these tyrannical conditions are completely man-made, just like the manacles are man-made. Maybe the metaphorical manacles are man-made too. But the word forged could also relate to a forgery, something that is untrue. So perhaps Blake is saying that the way things are is false, it's untrue. We shouldn't have to live like this. We could refuse to accept it, refuse the oppression, and like the French, start a revolution, overthrowing the corrupt leaders who are in power. More about this in the next stanza. So based on that one 3-word quotation, mind-forged manacles, we have a healthy amount of interpretations. This is definitely a key quotation to remember for your revision. And as I mentioned in the structural video, this third stanza gives us quite a lot of context and starts tackling the reasons why life in London is this way. With the chimney sweeps crying, keep in mind that chimney sweeps were mainly children, so a nod to child labour and exploitation here, and with the soldiers sighing, we confirm that it's the working class who were oppressed, and that the church and the palace are symbols of power of those in charge. So because these people in the church and the palaces are abusing their power, the masses are suffering greatly. Here, Blake writes about the blackening of the church. This could be a church as in a literal building that is literally getting blacker due to the smog and the pollution created during the Industrial Revolution, which was in full swing by 1797 and was tarnishing everything and changing the way that people lived their lives. But remember from the context video, we discussed that Blake was a romantic poet and quite anti-religious. So it's more likely that the church could be a metonym for religion in general. Those in power, the religious leaders, are living lives of luxury, preaching that the poor should be donating their money to charity. So even though daily life is a struggle through difficult conditions for the working class chimney sweeps, the religious leaders and those in the palaces, the royalty, the aristocracy, the upper class, they were all living quite comfortably. And it was this split in society that was one of the triggers for the French Revolution, and years later, the Russian Revolution too. So think about the blackening of the church, black having connotations of evil, corruption and death, and it's showing how the church is getting worse. The level of hypocrisy is appalling people, or that the behaviour of the church is appalling too. And the palace seems to be a metonym for the aristocracy, the monarchy and the elite upper classes in general. So as we already mentioned in the context video, Blake was a supporter of the French Revolution, as many romantic poets were, and believed that something similar should happen in Britain, that the poor should take power by force, and that seems to be referenced in the "runs in blood down palace walls" quote. Here he could be suggesting that the solution to all of our problems is to take back the power so that the blood of those in charge runs down the walls of the palace, which is pretty much what happened in France when the peasants executed King Louis XVI about 3 or 4 years before this poem was written. And the final stanza moves back to the people of London. We already discussed earlier about the infant and the tear being juxtaposed, but we've also got the juxtaposition of the newborn infant and the harlot, which is another word for a prostitute. Let's look a little deeper at the harlot's curse. Could it be that the prostitutes are seen as a curse on London, as in harlots are seen in a negative way by the people who live there? Or could it be that these working class women are cursed to be prostitutes because there's no other alternative for them to get by in the horrific conditions of the working class in London? There's not that many avenues available to them. And it's interesting that Blake chooses the word plague in the final line. A plague is something uncontrollable that affects many, many people. So maybe he's indicating that poverty, or oppression, is like a plague for the working classes. And he then finishes the poem with the marriage hearse. A hearse is a vehicle that carries the coffin to the funeral. So you have an oxymoron here of a marriage, which is supposed to be a happy ending at the end of the poem, as in they got married and lived happily ever after. But then it's completely juxtaposed with images of death, suggesting that everything, all of the goodness, all of the love, all of the happiness has been destroyed. It's been killed. And this is due to the way of life of the working class in London. They have no hope and no chance. Now, it's quite easy to find semantic fields in this one. You have semantic fields of weakness in weakness, cry, and infant. You have semantic fields of violence in blasts, soldier, blood. You have semantic fields of oppression in chartered, manacles, fear. You can take from these what you will, but they definitely give you a sense of what Blake's message was. You can get a sense of what his tone was and the emotions that were at play when he wrote the poem. I think semantic fields act as a kind of shortcut to working out the key themes and the overall idea of what the poem is about. Based on the semantic fields here, this poem appears to be about how oppression is making the people of London weak, and similar to what happened in France, maybe the way out is through violence. And that's all for today. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, don't be shy with the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps out with YouTube's algorithms. Thanks for watching, and happy revising.